Well, for me, growing up in America, of course I am an American, born and raised in West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. For me, just even the neighborhood I grew up in was predominantly black. You know, I was born in a Christian home. My parents, it was Jesus from birth, you know, as far as I know, you know what I mean? So, but we were the model family. All I remember from the beginning was the close-knit family that we had, and you know, still being shielded from outside, you know what I mean, the neighborhood that I lived in, because it really wasn't a great neighborhood. The block we lived on, city block we lived on, was pretty good, tree-lined and row homes or twins, semi-detached, and a lot of older folks on our block. But if you went one block over and 2 blocks up, you were in a pretty rough neighborhood. It was 52nd and Market Street. We used to call it the Strip. But you know, I was shielded from that. I never had to even venture up into that area. So we were close to University of Penn, Drexel, which was down the other way. But my you know, the childhood alone, I went to Christian schools from at least, you know, pre-K all the way up to 6th grade. You know, we all went to the same schools. We went to a church, actually, you know, it was 45 minutes from the house. So the church was predominantly white. But I knew that we were still considered the black family at the church. I kind of felt that, you know what I mean? But, you know, I went to school there, at the church, camp at the church. So, like I said, you know, the gospel was everything. Our Saturdays were spent all day preparing for Sunday worship. So we would play Christian card games. We weren't allowed to go to the regular movie theater. We had to go to a place called Harry Bristol's, which was a Christian cinema. So everything we saw, you know, was the cross and the switchblade and things like that. So, you know, that's how it was, you know, until Satan got a hold of my family. I was about 14 years old, and my parents split. So after that happened, my mother left my father, and we wound up going to live with my mother, which didn't last long for me. My mother and I kind of butted heads. Then I found trouble, found a lot of trouble. Then I found that neighborhood that was 1 block over and 2 blocks up. So I actually went back to move in with my dad. So it was my dad and I growing up, and but the devastation was already there. Nobody went to church anymore. There was no guidance, no direction. You know, my dad and I was more so, it was in passing, you know what I mean? But I was still, you know, maybe 15 years old, and on my own. I still remember being in some of the toughest predicaments, but I always knew something wasn't right. I always felt as though, you know, the things that I did, I didn't have to do, the trouble that I got into. I felt like I knew I didn't have to do those things, but I think peer pressure, and just being a follower, doing things just because. I wound up graduating. I did graduate high school at 16 years old, so I graduated early, but and actually wanted to go into the service, but my parents were gonna have to sign me in, and they didn't want to sign me in. So I wound up just getting jobs. I worked for my dad. I look back and I see all the avenues that and the circumstances that the Lord allowed to happen in my life to kind of keep me on a good route. The trouble I got in could have put me away, but fortunately, I guess God had a different plan for me. You know, I was always I felt like I was shielded, and of course, you know, you look back now, and you know, you see how things played out, and you realize that it was only God. So I traveled in the far country for about a good 10 years. And I remember getting into a major car accident, leaving work one night. Funny, leaving work intoxicated. How does that happen? Well, the job I had was you know, you were able to do those type of things. But anyway, I wound up flipping a car over, totaling it, and actually walking out without a scratch. You know, I remember my sister was back in church at the time, a church in Philadelphia, and after that accident, I was giving the airbags all the praise, and it took my sister to jog my memory and to remember, you know, remind me who to really give that praise to, and I started going back to church. I mean, and I remember at one point rededicating my life to Christ. I was about 25. Man, but by then so much damage had been done. I felt like I was scarred, but I still had hope. So I got involved in church. Church was different though. It was in Philadelphia neighborhoods. So now we're talking about an all-black church. Different kind of worship, different kind of attitude. So it was an experience. I mean, it was easy to adapt to, but I knew it was different. And then there was a point in time where my ex-brother-in-law happened to be the pastor of the church we were attending. And I was his, what you call, armor bearer. So whenever he went out to preach, whenever he preached in the church or whatever, I was with him. But then tragedy happened again, and the church split. Went through something terrible, very bad, and then bitterness came in again. You know, I was about to say, forget this. You know, I mean, at one point, the way I was acting, you know, I got to that point, and almost went back into another far country. You know what I mean? Just really out of bitterness, because my family was split, the church was split. You know, my church family, and it was just a bad situation. But fortunately, you know, it didn't last long, as you know, the 10 years originally for my youth, but I've found another church. I remember my dad, you know, helping me, even while he was living on the West Coast, he's helped me to find a church here on the East Coast. And he did send me to a church where it was a very multicultural. So here I'm on my third scene of a church, you know, the scenery. Now this looked like the church should look like. You know, so many different nationalities, you know, young black pastor, but the congregation was like salt and pepper. I mean, all shades. And it was just a blessing to be there. It's where I found my wife. And, you know, and we were there until I moved to Dover. And then, you know, here I am at Grace, you know, so. You know, I talked to a lot of people who are, some people, excuse me, they're stuck in the Old Testament. You know, they don't understand They don't understand that we're all one in Christ. I still believe some people don't see that. I hear people say, we're the chosen generation or whatever, you know what I mean? And whatever their teachings are, it seems like it's Old Testament, or, they're still under the law, you know what I mean, and not under grace. No pun intended. But a lot of the, Paul's teachings, was particularly to the churches that he founded. And I mean, it's blatant, the plan that was there from the beginning, you know what I mean? Even on the book of Acts and stuff like that, seeing how the church started and like that, and just watching, just kind of visualizing what the church looked like at that point in time. And just the fact that when people see that, they can really see that's how it should be, The segregated church, me being a part of a segregated church, there's no inclusion. It's just that, segregation. And it almost shows like you're stuck in the old ages, like there's no change, or no growth. I've been part of churches that were segregated, and there was no outreach. It was whoever walked in the door, this is who we're gonna, this is who we're gonna cater to, this is who we're gonna serve, as opposed to trying to branch out and talk to other cultures, other ethnic groups, just other people in general. And the multicultural, really, even just for me, and even when I've invited people to church, when I was at a very multicultural church, even before Grace, they were in awe. I mean, they were really in awe, and a lot of them wind up joining the church. Some people still were out looking for churches like that, you know what I mean? Because they were really influenced and impressed by the unity of the different diversities, So, yeah. The most fulfilling ones were some of the ones growing up, to be honest with you, with fellow Christians. A lot of the guys that I went to school with at a young age were white, and there was no biasness whatsoever. And they never made you feel any different. Even when I would bring them to my house, and we knew we were in a different neighborhood. I mean, the city, inner city, sirens and stuff like that. They don't hear that, you know what I mean? But they never said anything negative, and even when I stayed at their house, I mean, they made me feel like family. There was never, there was never a hint of racism. As a matter of fact, I didn't experience any racism until about 14 years old. But I just remember, there was two guys. Both of their names were Stephen. Stephen LeBold and Stephen James, I think that's what his name was. It's been a while, but they're both doing well. But those guys really made an impact in my life with their families, because they just, really were true Christians. There wasn't anything that, like I said, they never made you feel different whatsoever, So I am Carl Way, and now you know a little bit more about me.